Better Read Than Dead, Episode 4. Funny Stories That Happened to Me by Nabi Computers, writing on the Fresh Loaf website, a community of amateur bakers and artisan bread enthusiasts. Read by me. Originally posted February 26, 2008. Many years ago, I was working in a bakery that was in business for what seemed like forever. The mixers were built around 1950 and were huge. The one I was using was a 140 quart mixer, the largest stand type mixer made. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and I had just finished weighing a bread mix which called for 100 pounds of high gluten flour Kaiser rolls to be exact. I set the mixer to speed 1 and put in the yeast, hit the power switch, and the mixer started the way it did normally. 30 seconds later, the mixer started to shake, and so did the floor. Thinking that the mixer threw a gear and was shaking itself apart, I hit the emergency brake. The power was cut. The mixer stopped dead in its tracks, but the floor continued to shake. It was then I heard the car and store alarms going off in the distance, and it hit me. Earthquake! An earthquake in New York. Impossible but true. We had a small earthquake in New York back in the 70s, and there I was mixing bread. Now, I'm no small guy, I am about 260 pounds or so, and we had just hired a refuge from Vietnam as helper. This guy was 90 pounds soaking wet. Seconds later, this little guy comes running as fast as he can into the kitchen, yelling as loud as he can, "Norm, what you do, you fall down." Well, he thought it was my fault. After all, I was the head baker. By this time, the quake is long over. It only lasted about 20 seconds. The radio was reporting the news about the earthquake, and I told he, "It's not me, you nut, it was an earthquake." He turns all the colours a person can turn, starting with white and going through the whole rainbow. Puts his hands over his head and starts running into the basement screaming, "Earthquake, earthquake, earthquake, earthquake," as his voice trailed off into the distance. Remember, by this time it was all over. I don't know what happened to him after that, because I did not see him till the next day. What did I do? Well, I had to reset the mixer because I put it in emergency, which took a minute, and within 5 minutes after the New York earthquake, I was back to mixing 100 pounds of Kaiser rolls. You just can't make this stuff up. The comments. First comment by Sinlinden. Funny. Next, by D.M. Snyder. Title of comment, Earthquake Story. My grandfather died in 1952. Uncle Maury flew out from Flint for the funeral. He stayed in a motel in LA overnight, planning to drive to Fresno in time for the service the next morning. He asked for a 4 a.m. wake-up call and went to bed. Well, the Tehachapi earthquake happened at 3:52 a.m. the next morning. When he arrived in Fresno, he had a few choice comments about how motels awaken guests in California. David. Next comment by Susan. Comment title, Earthquake, Not Bread. Another earthquake story. The earth shook on our honeymoon. We were in a tiny restaurant in Cozumel, Mexico, when the Loma Prieta quake hit, up in the SF area in October 1989. Our waiter came flying out of the kitchen screaming what sounded like heat quick, grabbed Gary's arm and pulled him into the kitchen to see the TV. Shocking and sad video, of course, but we were glad he let us in on the news. Susan from San Diego. Next comment by Holds99. Comment title, great story. That's a funny story. My question is, how did your Kaiser rolls turn out? Original poster replies, comment title, just fine, nothing really. Just fine, nothing really got to me in those, my younger days. Pro baker for over 25 years. Rhett. Next comment by Rosalie. Comment title, I think I was there too. Norm, I grew up in upstate New York, Albany County. I moved to California in 1973, but it was years before I experienced anything more than a light tremor here. I don't remember the date, the late 70s or early 80s, but I was visiting my sister who lived in the Chelsea district of Manhattan. It was early morning when I felt the building shake. I thought it was a truck, but I remembered that a truck had never shaken the building before. I realized it was an earthquake, and later I'd heard that it had been centered slightly upstate. It must have been the same earthquake. How many earthquakes does New York have? In December 2003, we had 2 6+ earthquakes here in San Luis Obispo County, California. Not fun, I can tell you. Tremors are scary enough when you can't trust the earth beneath your feet. Rosalie. Nabai Computers, original poster, replies to Rosalie. Comment title, In my 50s and that's the only one I remember. Pro baker for over 25 years. Retired. Another funny story from The Fresh Loaf, a community of amateur bakers and artisan bread enthusiasts. Funny Father's Day bread by JW. Actually, just a yeasted multigrain, pretty much according to the recipe, Reinhardt crust and crumb, apart from 2-day-old biga instead of 1, milk instead of buttermilk, white rice instead of brown rice, added more salt. Interjection here by me. That seems like quite a lot of differences. I don't know how many ingredients go into bread, but that seems like quite a few changes to what would have been the original recipe by Reinhardt crust and crumb. End of interjection. Here's the funny part. The oven rise lifted up one bread, but pushed down the other. Why is that? Temp should not have caused this. I did score them, but a bit too late. Structure and taste are really great. The tie is from a few years ago. Wanted to make sure my kids remember what day it is. Happy baking. Cheers. JW. Interjection. There is a photograph that includes a tie. End of interjection. Comments. Noor 13. I think it looks delicious. Well done. Comment by Bernie Peel. Cool. The loaves look great, but the message is sublime. Happy belated Father's Day from another. And original poster replies to Bernie Peel. Do you mean the message on the tie? I would read what was on the tie, but it appears to be by young children who haven't quite got to the writing stage. There we go. That was another story from The Fresh Loaf, a community of amateur bakers and artisan bread enthusiasts. One final bread story from Australian Tales. Discover your inner Aussie. Give us our daily bread, a funny family story. This is a funny family story about our mother and her first attempt at making her own bread when she moved to the Australian outback. Although this first attempt was a bit of a disaster, she was never one to give up, and she eventually mastered the art of bread making. But the telling of this funny family story lasted longer than she had hoped. Our mother was born and grew up around the coastal area of New South Wales, and was very used to the normal everyday things, like the milk got delivered, she could pop down the baker and pick up a loaf of bread, the butcher, the greengrocer and the corner store held every convenience that was needed for a normal existence. Mother was totally unprepared for life in the outback, and some of the things that occurred made for some funny family stories. There was no baker around the corner, so she had to learn how to make and bake bread. This was not easy, as she had never done it before. She wanted to surprise Dad with her baking skills, so she read and reread the recipe on how to mix the yeast and knead the dough, and how she had to wait the allotted time for the bread to rise before putting it in the oven. The wood stove was not very accurate, temperature-wise, so once you put the wood in, you just hoped the temperature was correct for any baking that needed to be done. I think you have probably guessed this whole bread baking experiment was doomed to have something go wrong. Dad, planning to be gone most of the day, headed off up the border fence to check the fence line and look at the dog traps, which he would set to catch the dingoes. Mother completed everything according to the instructions from the recipe. The final kneading was done. The bread was put aside, covered by clean tea towels, waiting to rise. Mother, having waited the time suggested, lifted the tea towels, and there sat the loaves of bread, as flat and as hard as rocks. The dough had not risen one bit. Mother kneaded it again, but to no avail. Mother then did the only thing a wife could possibly do. She hid the evidence. There was no way Dad was going to find out about her failure. She kneaded the dough into a big ball and then dug a hole in the front garden, which was not easy as it had rained in months. And she buried the dough like a corpse. She quickly made a damper, which she had mastered the skill to do, for dinner, and having hid the failed bread making evidence in the front yard, thought her secret was safe. By the time Dad arrived, everything on the home front was great. Dad commented that storm clouds were gathering and it could just rain, which was unusual for the bush. We all went to bed listening to the raindrops on the tin roof and slept like lambs. Dad, being an early riser, wandered out to the front yard to see how much rain we had been blessed with. He was met with an incredible sight. There in the front yard was this big mound of dough rising above the soil like a bloody huge mushroom. He knew straight away what had happened, and I guess was almost wetting himself with laughter. He yelled at my mother, "Hey Stella, quick, come and have a look at this bloody great mushroom." The moisture from the rain and the warmth of the earth had made the yeast react and to do what it wouldn't do in her kitchen for Mother. The dough had risen. You can imagine Mother was mortified, and she'd never lived that one down. Mind you, she handled it okay whenever this funny family story was told. She liked a funny story as much as the next person. She did become a very good bread maker, and we, as kids, would wait for the hot bread to come out of the oven and wolf it down with great glee, but we still get a kick out of this funny family story whenever we get together. That was Give Us Our Daily Bread, a funny family story from Australian Tales, Discover Your Inner Aussie, read by me. Thanks very much for listening.